We'll get started in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm thankful that you're able to be here this morning. If you don't mind, turn over in your Bibles to the book of Job, chapter 32. Today we get to introduce a new character into our story, and not necessarily a new character. We've already mentioned Elihu a couple of times, but haven't heard anything from him until chapter 32. And then, boy, do we ever hear something from Elihu. For several chapters, Elihu has got something to say. He's been bottling up. I don't know if he's been sitting back taking notes while everyone else has been speaking, but Elihu has got something to say. And then after Elihu speaks, God speaks. And we'll make mention about something interesting about that here in just a little bit. And after that, we'll get right on into the conclusion of the story and Job's repentance in chapter 42. But we've still got 10 chapters to go through over the next several weeks. There's a lot of great things that are going to be discussed when we get to what God has to say. It really transitions us into the spiritual crisis that Job is in when we hear God's side of this story. And the counsel that he has for Job is great counsel for all of us. If we really want to get right down to what crisis management is all about, it's all about listening and trusting in God. Listening to what He has to say and then trusting what He says, which implies that we would implement what He has to say into our lives. So when we get right down to it, everything that we've read so far when it comes to crisis management has been advice from Job's friends. And some of it is not so bad of advice. Sometimes we give these friends such a hard time about what they have to say, and I don't know if any of us would do any better. And some of what they've said is true, some of it is good, but some of it is distorted or perverted just because they don't really understand the full picture. And you really can't blame them for that. They don't know everything behind the scenes. But it does make us think about the things that we say and the counsel that we give to people in times of crisis. Needs to be very careful and thought-provoking, where we truly think about what we have to say and not just say it, not just post it or tweet it. We've got to be careful with our words. And words mean something. And when someone needs advice, when someone needs counsel, what we've heard from these friends is not the greatest advice. But like I said, it just reminds us of what we need to do and be careful about what we say. Sometimes the best thing to do when in times of crisis and trying to counsel or help somebody is to just not say anything at all. The friends started that way, didn't they? For 7 days they sat there quietly. But then they unleashed. So when we look at crisis management and we hear from Elihu, it's interesting. So starting in chapter 32, we'll kind of go through a little bit of this text and notice some things. I think most of us, honestly, have found ourselves in situations where two people are arguing. If you haven't, then you are oblivious and living under a rock. Just relationships in general, sometimes there is confrontation. And it doesn't matter who or what or how that relationship is, there's confrontation. Kira and I have made a resolution this year. Can I tell everybody? I'm going to anyway, right? We've made a resolution this year not to fight. I know, right? It's humorous. And I'm not talking about no confrontation at all, or not, there's definitely times that we'll get on each other's nerves. But we've really tried, we're going to just not, have one of those fights that we have where one of us is mad and we start saying things we don't really mean and just spouting off and getting angry, raising our voices. And so far this year, it's gone so really, really well. I mean, what is this, January 10th? And we're doing pretty good. And honestly, though, I think throughout the holiday season, like a week or so before Christmas or something like that, we weren't fighting then, and that's when we thought, we haven't had a fight in a while. And I always tell people when I'm counseling those the premarital kids that are about to get married, I always tell them fighting is healthy, fighting is good, and it helps you, develop the relationship. You just have to learn how to fight right. You have to learn how to fight fair, and that's just part of a marriage relationship. So we're trying not to, and it's going pretty well right now. I don't know when our first fight will be, but I'll let y'all know. But you know what? Confrontation and arguments, that's just part of human nature. And these friends of Job, they've had a little bit of confrontation even with him. And they've been battling it out. They've been arguing with Job about whether he has sinned or not, and if he's repented or not. And Job has stood his ground. And finally, they just have nothing more to say. And you've probably been in situations like that where you've argued with someone, and it gets to the point where, okay, that's it. We have nothing more to say. And a lot of times we say things, well, we'll just have to agree to what? Disagree. And I can understand that. I don't like that phrase. I'm the kind of guy that says there has to be resolution to our argument. There has to be an answer. I don't like the agree to disagree mantra, but I can understand it. But these friends of Job, they've said everything that they can say, and they're done with it. And finally, maybe if you're in a situation where maybe two friends have argued and they have nothing more to say to each other, maybe that's when you get to say, hey guys, let me offer some advice, or let me try to mend the relationship now. Well, it seems like that's the situation that Elihu finds himself in, where he has listened and he's watched these friends argue. I think we mentioned at the very beginning, if not, I'll mention it now. A lot of people say that Elihu is probably from where Job is, so the other friends have come in to where Job is. They're from another land, and they've come in. But Elihu, a lot of people say, well, maybe Elihu is from the same hometown as Job. And he's the younger of the friends, and he waited. Job has just completed his 9th monologue, and in chapter 31. And it began in chapter 26, and it continued down through 31. And 31 ends with a statement. We mentioned it last week, where it ends with this thought that the words of Job have ended. That's the end of it. The very last phrase, the words of Job are ended. And so we pick up with chapter 32 with Elihu. And I want us to read a little bit of the text here. Verses 1 through 5. It says, Then these three men ceased answering Job, because he was righteous in his own eyes. But the anger of Elihu, the son of Barachil, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Buzite of the family of Ram, burned. Against Job his anger burned, because he justified himself before God. And his anger burned against his three friends, because they had found no answer, and yet had condemned Job. Now Elihu had waited to speak to Job, because they were years older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of the three men, his anger burned. So Job's three friends, they've given up, according to verse 1. They've given up because Job was, and I think this is an interesting phrase, was righteous in his own eyes. And a lot of times, when we've read that phrase before, righteous in your own eyes, or did what was right in your own eyes, that has a negative connotation to it. Matter of fact, at the very end of the book of Judges, it says that there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's a negative thing. And we see the turmoil and the upheaval of the land. The nation of Israel was in terrible shape because of the anarchy that was going on. No king in Israel. There was no government, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. That makes a good point. We say, well, no government. We want no government. Well, how'd that work out for Israel? It didn't work out very well for them. No government, no king whatsoever, and everybody just did whatever they wanted. And that was terrible. But that phrase, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, a lot of times we think, oh, that's a bad thing. You know, and it is. But we know Job's heart. We know that he's a righteous man, and the Bible, at the very beginning of the book, says that Job was blameless. Doesn't mean he's perfect. Job has already said, I'm not perfect. But I have not sinned in the way that you're saying that I've sinned. I've not rebelled against God. But the friend's perspective is they want to nail down exactly what Job has done, and they cannot find anything. And so their perspective is Job is just, he thinks he's so righteous. Job is a goody two-shoes. He thinks he's so perfect. And in Job's perspective, he's going, yeah, guys, tell me, help me, show me, what have I done wrong? And he actually, we've already read this and studied it, he actually went through a list of things, and he says, hey, if I had done this, then sure, I'm guilty. If I've not fed the poor, if I've not taken care of the widow, if I have committed adultery and sent my wife on to be with somebody else, sure, I'm condemned. But I haven't done those things. And so Job's perspective is, yeah, I'm righteous. I'm a righteous person. And there's nothing wrong. A lot of times we think, I don't want to, I need to be humble as a Christian. And that's true. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm doing the very best that I can. I'm a good person. I'm trying hard. And I'm a follower of Christ. I am a Christian. And so when you're a Christian and when you're trying to do what's right and be righteous, there's nothing wrong with saying, I can't find anything that I'm really rebelling against God in. Yeah, I make mistakes every day, but because I'm a Christian, I have the grace of God. There is no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus, Romans chapter 8, verse 1. There's no condemnation. I'm not perfect, but boy, if I could just try to be righteous and be like Job, then sure, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm righteous. I'm forgiven. I'm justified. I'm sanctified. I'm trying to be a Christian. Nothing wrong with that. I think Job is saying, I'm trying to be godly. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to be godly. Well, his friends say, well, look, he's righteous in his own eyes. And that's a bad thing. But we look at it from the bigger perspective because we know Job's heart and we know the big picture and we know why the bad things have happened to Job. And so it's not such an off-the-wall comment to be made. When we see that his friends stop answering and they say, well, he's just righteous in his own eyes. Well, that's true on both respects. That's important to think about. Well, at this point, it almost opens up an opportunity. The friends state, well, Job is righteous in his own eyes, but then verse 2, but anger. But the anger of Elihu. Well, it just opened up a moment where someone could say, okay, is there anybody else that can find any wrongdoing in Job? And Elihu sits back and goes, yeah, I've been taking notes. I've got some things. Hang on, I've got 5 chapters. Buckle up. I've got something to say. And Elihu, he's still wet behind the ears. He's a young man. I don't know what that is. I don't know what age that is. Do you ever feel like, maybe I'm the only one, when I was 20, I thought I knew a lot. I thought I knew a lot. I really did. In my 20s, I had figured out a lot of things. Kira and I got married. I was 22. We had Rachel, and I was 27. I was holding a full-time job. I'm a smart guy. Graduated college. I've got it figured out. Well, now I'm 40, and I'm looking back, and I'm like, I had no clue. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you who are 60 plus, I'm 40, and I probably have no clue, do I? Is that true? Y'all are all giggling. It must be true. Thank you. All you who are 80 plus, I don't know if there's anybody in here 80 plus. I won't point any fingers. But I bet you the 80-year-olds say to you 60-year-olds plus that y'all have no clue. You see, age and maturity is relative to where you are in your own life. So I don't know where Elihu stands. I don't know how old he is. Maybe Job's friends were in their 40s and Elihu's in his 20s. I don't know. It doesn't even matter. He's definitely younger. He even calls himself, we'll see in a minute, he says that he's younger than they are. Whatever the case is, he does have some things to say. I do think it's interesting, though, that he waits. That is a sign of respect. That he's a younger man and he waits for everybody else to speak and before he goes ahead and says something. He's the last one to speak before God answers in chapter 38. He's a young man. Verse 6 tells us this. We're going to stay in verse 5 here just for a second, or this section right here. I want to point something out to you. But verse 6 tells us that he's a young man. Look what it says. So Elihu, the son of, Barakel, the Buzite, spoke out, I am young in years and you are old. I don't know if that's a compliment or it's like an underhanded way of saying you guys are geezers. And I know that I've got this figured out. But he says, therefore I was shy and afraid to tell you what I think. I thought age should speak. There he says it. I thought your maturity should speak first. And increased years should teach wisdom. And we'll get back to that. But he's young in years. He deferred to his elders. But now he just can't hold back any longer. And he speaks, and he speaks. And he speaks, and he speaks, and he speaks. And then he speaks some more. It's like he did at the end. And he just really in this chapter, he just gets ramped up. And he justifies why he's chosen to pile on the angry words. He's not happy with Job's friends. He explains that he just doesn't feel that they have expressed the situation correctly. And really, Elihu, we're going to find out, he's no fan of Job either. Look at verses 1 through 5 again. Notice this. I want you to notice these words. He's angry. These are the angry words of Elihu. He's angry. Look what it says. But the anger of Elihu. And then again, it burned against Job. His anger burned. And then again, and his anger burned. And then the last part for these three men, when there was no answer, his anger burned. Very passionate person. I would caution against giving advice when you're angry. Job needs to be careful. Or, no, not Job. Elihu needs to be careful with the words that he has if he's going to come from this deep emotion of anger to give advice. I don't think that's a good thing to do. I've been guilty of that. I've been guilty of giving advice in anger, and that's wrong, and I should repent. He's angry. You're reading through chapter 32 and really the rest of it, you almost have to read it with an angry tone to it. You should try that. Whenever you read this section of the Scriptures, read it in your mind or read it out loud with an angry tone. It kind of brings, I think, more of the passion and the meaning behind it. Verse 19 and 20, he says, "Behold, my belly is like unvented wine. Like new wineskins, it's about to burst. Let me speak that I may get relief. Let me open my lips and answer." He's describing this. He's about to burst with anger. He can't hold it back anymore. And he says, like unvented wine that creates this gas that's in these new wineskins. It just expands and expands, and he just can't hold back anymore. And he's like, let me just get this out so that I am relieved. Let me get this, we would say, let me get this off my chest. I'm holding it in, and now I want to give you an answer. And so Elihu admits that it's primarily his own satisfaction that he wants to give these words, not for Job's benefit. He's like, I just need to get this off my chest. I'm holding it back. And you know what? You can do what you want to with it, Job, but I've got to be one that gives an answer here just for my own benefit. I can't hold it in anymore. That's a dangerous place to be. A dangerous place to be. And so this whole chapter is comprised of Elihu telling us that he's decided to speak out. That's really what chapter 32 is. He's just saying, chapter 32, I've decided to speak. He really doesn't give us any meat, not hardly any advice whatsoever. He just wants to say, I'm wanting to talk. The incompetence of Job's friends is what led him to this anger, and I think also his anger for Job. Because really, Elihu doesn't offer much more than what the friends of Job have given. Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar, they pretty much have exhausted everything, and Elihu thinks as a young whip, he can come in there and give some good advice, but really, it's the same stuff. All right? So Elihu has angry words. Yes, sir. Yeah, okay. Before God. Yeah. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I'll have to look at that. Because he justified himself before God rather than God. Yeah, it may be the same thing, if you think about it. I'll get back to you on that, Charles. I'll get the translation to find out about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of God. Yeah. So Elihu expresses his frustration with Job and his friends for not coming to a satisfactory conclusion concerning their disagreement. Look at verse 7. I've already looked at verse 6, and we read verse 7. He says, I thought age should speak, and increased years should teach wisdom. So the normal order of things is that those who are older should know more. That's what we think. Those who are older should know more. And from that position of knowing more, factually, a person should be able to apply their knowledge of life. That's what wisdom is. It's not just knowing facts. That's being intelligent. But being wise is knowing how to apply those facts, that knowledge. And all else being equal, we'd like to think that those who are older should have more wisdom. More years equals more wisdom, or at least we think that that's the way that it should be. But let me ask you, just because you are older, does that make you more wise? No, it doesn't. We know the answer to that. A foolish man can be any age. Any age. The number of years that you've taken in breath, the number of years that you've walked this earth, does not mean or make you wise. It should contribute, though, like I said, the longer that you've lived, the more knowledge that you should gain. And the more knowledge you gain, you might learn how to use that knowledge, which would equal wisdom. And I think that is the natural progression of it. But that's not always a guarantee. So when he says, I thought age should speak and increased years should teach wisdom, I wonder if he's saying that kind of snarky. Well, I thought that since you guys were older, and the things that you guys would say would equal wisdom. But obviously that's not the case. So now I'm going to speak. That's the way I read verse 7. It's almost snarky. Verse 8 and 9. Let's read 8 and 9. Says, but it is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives them understanding. The abundant in years may not be wise, nor many elders understand justice. So there, he says it. Look, guys, just because you're older doesn't mean you're wiser. Elihu is now coming to find out that it's not just the age of a person that makes him wise. A person needs God's Spirit for wisdom. And so your wisdom is not necessarily a natural thing. It's not given that just because you're older means you are naturally wiser. No, God is the one who grants wisdom and understanding by His Spirit. And so that leads Elihu to acknowledge that the older among us are not always the wisest. Notice what he says. It is a spirit in man. And I like this. The breath of the Almighty gives them understanding. True wisdom, we've said this weeks ago. True wisdom comes from God. And Elihu is speaking that right now. The breath of the Almighty gives them understanding. And he's right. I don't think he's necessarily just trying to be maybe insulting. Maybe he's simply just speaking truth as he sees it. And what these men have demonstrated is that even though they are the oldest, they are not necessarily the wisest. So verses 10 through 12, let's look at that. He says, so I say, listen to me. Remember, we're supposed to read this a little bit like he's angry. Listen to me. I too will tell you what I think. Behold, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasoning. While you pondered what to say, I even paid close attention to you. Indeed, there was no one who refuted Job. No one of you who answered his words. I listened and I waited. And here we are, still with no answer as to what Job has done. Not one person here could find the answer. I listened and I waited. What Elihu is saying is that these men did not find the right answers to Job's objections. You know, they came up with answers, but that necessarily doesn't mean that it was the right answers. They came up with wrong answers. All of them tried to prove that Job was wrong, but none of them was able to do it convincingly. And he is angry. Elihu is angry. But the friends failed to convict Job and claims that even though he is young, he believes God will enable him to succeed where they failed. And so he wants to take his turn. All right? Now I'm going to talk. Now I'm going to give you answers. Verse 13, he says, do not say, we have found wisdom. God will rout him, not man. So in other words, be careful before you confidently assert what you speak on God's behalf. That's good advice for all of us, isn't it? That we be careful to not necessarily speak on behalf of God. We do that sometimes when someone is going through difficult times. A dangerous thing to say when there's turmoil or crisis is to say, it was the Lord's will. It does not make sense to me. Don't tell somebody who is going through a crisis situation, well, you know, this was in God's plan. This was God's plan. That's dangerous. That doesn't make sense. When turmoil happens, it's not God's plan that that was to happen. Man has a choice. And sin enters our world, and things happen that are bad. God's plan, actually, from the very beginning, was that man would live in harmony with God. That's God's plan, and it's still God's plan. He just has to sacrifice His own Son in order for us to have that plan carry out, that we would live in harmony with Him. That's God's plan. So when turmoil happens, it is not God's plan. That's dangerous words, to speak on behalf of God and try to execute His will and impose it on others to try to bring them comfort. Let's just stop saying that, okay? Just make it a pact between all of us in this room that we won't say, well, it was God's will that this happened when someone's going through turmoil. Mark? Yeah, that's right. A lot of times it could be a part of Satan's plan. Absolutely. Satan works in this world, and that's sin. That's wickedness and unrighteousness. It's not God's plan. Thank you, Mark. All right, verse 14. He says, for he has not arranged his words against me, nor will I reply to him with your arguments. Job hasn't argued with me, is what Elihu says. Job did not argue with me, so I'm not going to tell him the same stuff you three did. I'm not going to say the same things you did. Well, what's funny is that he actually ends up doing that very thing. Verse 15, he says, they are dismayed, they no longer answer, words have failed them. And so Elihu speaks of Job's three friends in the third person here. Notice that. They, as if they're not even there. They are dismayed, they no longer answer, words have failed them. It's almost like Elihu is back there whispering in Job's ears, and three friends are right there, and he says, listen, everything they've said, it's of no value. They no longer answer. Words have failed them. They don't have any clue. And so he speaks of them in the third person, saying that they've ran out of words to try to solve this problem. Verse 16 says, shall I wait because they do not speak, because they stop and no longer answer? It's a question. Should I just be quiet? Should I just remain silent because my elders are? These older three friends are? We still haven't figured this out yet. Should I just be quiet? And so he says, I too, verse 17, will answer my share and also will tell my opinion. So Elihu resolves to speak after making case for doing so, and he's able to be respectful and authoritative in his declaration, what he wants to say. In verse 18 and 19, he says, For I am full of words. The spirit within me constrains me. Behold, my belly again is like an unvented wine, like new wineskins that's about to burst. We've already read that. He says, I have to speak. It's not just an idle want, it is a need. I've got to say this. In verse 20 he says, Let me speak that I may get relief. Let me open my lips and answer. Let me now be partial to no one, nor flatter any man, for I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon take me away. And so as he says, I need to speak. I've got to say these words. And so Elihu sets the stage for an objective look at things. No flattery, no partiality. He'll be just. So that's all the more reason to listen to him. That's the case that he's making. Elihu is honest and he doesn't know how to use flattery. He's above this and knows flattery has no place in the words of man. In the words of a man of God. If he's going to be godly, there's no flattery. God would not tolerate this. Elihu knows he is accountable to God for the things that he says. So think how Job's three friends have taken the liberty of asserting their opinions and declaring them to be on God's behalf. They didn't focus very much on how they were accountable to God for the words that they used. It's so important to see that. They were just giving advice, spilling it out, and they never really thought these words matter. What someone says matters. We've got to be careful with that's a good lesson for us. We've got to be careful with our own words. Crisis situation or not, we've got to be careful. And so Elihu plainly states that he and everyone else is accountable to God for the words that we use. Well, I wanted to get into chapter 33, but I've got 5 minutes left. That's right. So I'm not going to. I spent a lot of time in chapter 32, but that's okay. I'm going to pick up with chapter 33 next week, and we'll just continue on with what Elihu has to say. Thank you very much for your attention this morning.